after cooking all day, my children told me, "You'll eat the leftovers from the floor." But then, morning came slow to Margaret's little house, like a shy guest. The sun slid past the lace curtains and spilled across the kitchen table she'd scrubbed the night before. She stood there in her cotton robe and old slippers, a hand around her mug of tea, listening to the kettle sigh the way her late husband once did when he came home from the factory. It was Saturday, family dinner day, and she had been planning this menu all week. She set the mug down and reached for the apron with the tiny blue flowers, the one her husband used to tease her about. "Looks like you're wearing spring," he'd say, kissing her cheek on the way to the door. He'd been gone 6 years now. Some days felt like 6 minutes. The list she'd written on a yellow notepad waited on the counter. Roast chicken with lemon and rosemary, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, honey carrots, cornbread, and the apple pie that always made the house smell like October. She pressed her palm to the paper, steadying herself. If she cooked it right, if everything looked beautiful, maybe her son and daughter would look at her the way they used to. Maybe they would remember. Margaret rinsed the chicken in the sink, humming an old church hymn under her breath. She patted it dry, tucked slices of lemon and sprigs of rosemary under the skin, then rubbed it with butter until it shone. She did everything the way her mother taught her. Slow, even, careful. Into the oven it went. The heat breathed out, warm against her cheeks. She wiped the counter, set a pot to boil, and peeled potatoes into a wide bowl. The peels curled into little ribbons, dropping soft against porcelain. With each swipe of the peeler, memories came. David at 6, stealing carrot sticks with a grin. Susan at 10, standing on a stool to stir batter, flour in her hair. Laughter bouncing off these same walls. Her husband whistling low, calling them his kitchen orchestra. The memory made her smile and ache at the same time. Timer chirped. She turned the beans in a skillet with slivered almonds and a pat of butter until they glistened bright and green. The kettle sang again. She poured hot water over tea leaves, steam rising in gentle clouds. On the radio, the announcer talked about weekend sales and traffic on the turnpike. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Margaret moved through the house with a rag in one hand and polish in the other. She dusted the family photos. David in his graduation cap. Susan in a prom dress the color of wine. The 4 of them at the beach in a picture so sun-bleached it looked like a dream. She paused at her husband's face, traced the air where his jawline used to be. "Help me today," she whispered. "Help me make it nice." Back in the kitchen, the chicken's skin had turned the color of late afternoon. She basted it, the juices murmuring in the pan. Potatoes met the masher and cream. She seasoned by memory, by feel, tasting, nodding. She set the table with the good plates, white china with a gold ring, small scratches and all. Cloth napkins. The silverware she polished every Easter and Christmas. A small vase of daisies from the yard, stems trimmed short to keep them neat. He checked the clock. 2 hours to go. There were little things if you looked closely. A threadbare patch on the rug beneath the sink. Paint chipping along the baseboard by the back door. A chair leg that wobbled if you rocked too hard. Margaret saw them all and smoothed her hand over each flaw as if a touch could mend. She had done the same with her family. Smoothing, mending, explaining, excusing. Loving was a habit you kept even when it wasn't returned. Especially then. She sat for a moment, careful not to wrinkle her Sunday dress, the blue one with the soft collar. She had pinned her hair, dabbed on a pinch of powder, and chosen her pearls. They were not real pearls. They were from a department store that closed years ago. But they made her feel finished, the way a frame makes a picture look like it belongs. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Susan, "We'll be there. Don't make it heavy food, Mom. I'm watching my carbs." Margaret glanced at the buttery potatoes, the cornbread waiting to be cut, and typed back, "There will be salad, dear." Another buzz. "We can't stay long. David has an appointment." They were adults with busy lives. She reminded herself of that. When you raise children to leave, they left. That's how it was supposed to work. Still, a small flutter of worry beat at the edges of her ribs. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they would sit, talk about nothing and everything, and the house would feel full again. She stood and moved to the pie. The dough had rested just long enough. She rolled it out, the pin whispering over flour, and draped the round across the waiting tin. Apples tossed with cinnamon and sugar fell like soft rain into the crust. She dotted them with butter, capped the pie with its top shell, crimped the edges, and cut 3 little vents that looked like leaves. Into the oven it went. In minutes the kitchen would smell like her children's childhood. Sweet, warm, safe. Margaret cleaned as she cooked. She always did. That way, when the doorbell rang, she could greet them with her hands open, not busy. She checked the mirror by the hallway, patted her hair again, and practiced her smile. Not too bright, not desperate. Just happy to see them. She rehearsed the little questions she'd ask. How's work? How's the new apartment? Did you fix the faucet? So they wouldn't feel interrogated, only welcomed. The timer chimed once more. She pulled the pie and set it to cool by the window, where the autumn air could find it. Across the street, the neighbor's dog barked twice. Car door thudded shut. Somewhere someone laughed. Margaret touched the back of a dining chair and closed her eyes. Let it be a good night, she said softly. Let it be gentle. The clock hand slid forward. The house smelled like love you could eat. The table waited, tidy and bright, as if ready to hold all the things her heart could not say. And in the quiet between timers, in the narrow space where hope lives, Margaret believed, just for a moment, that tonight might stitch something back together. The chicken was golden, the pie a crown of cinnamon and butter cooling on the sill. Margaret checked her watch for the 4th time, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. Her heart beat a little quicker each time a car passed outside. Tonight mattered. She told herself not to expect too much, but expectation was already there, tucked like a note in her pocket. At last, the crunch of tires on gravel. Margaret peeked through the lace curtain. A sleek silver sedan stopped in front of the house. David stepped out first, tall, broad-shouldered, his suit too sharp for a Saturday. His wife, Claire, followed, sliding on her sunglasses even though the sun had already set. Susan arrived minutes later in her bright red SUV. She stepped out in heels that clicked across the driveway, her husband trailing behind with a phone pressed to his ear. Susan smoothed her hair, looked up at the house, and sighed loud enough for Margaret to hear through the window. Margaret hurried to the door, pulling it open with a hopeful smile. You made it, she said, her voice soft but glowing. David kissed the air beside her cheek. Yeah, traffic was brutal. You really should think about moving closer to the city, Mom. Out here feels stuck in another century. Claire brushed past, her perfume sharp, her eyes already roaming the hallway. It smells heavy in here. What is it? Butter. Cream. It's dinner, Margaret said gently. Your favorites. Susan stepped in next, her heels tapping like a clock counting down. Mom, you still haven't fixed these steps? Someone could break a leg. If you're going to insist on living here, at least hire someone. Or sell the place already. Margaret's smile trembled but held. I'll see about it. Please come in. Make yourselves comfortable. The dining room gleamed, napkins folded, silver catching the light of the chandelier. Margaret had polished everything twice. She pulled out chairs for them, the way she used to when they were children coming home from school. David dropped into his seat with a sigh. This table feels smaller than I remember. Susan's husband looked up from his phone long enough to mutter. Wi-Fi. No, dear, Margaret said softly. But I'll light candles soon. It makes the room cozy. Susan laughed, shaking her head. Candles instead of Wi-Fi. Honestly, Mom, sometimes I wonder how you even manage. Margaret's hands folded together. She wanted to say, I managed to raise you. I managed to keep this house when your father died. I managed to make this meal even when my back ached and my hands shook. But she didn't. She only said, dinner is ready. I hope you're hungry. She carried in the chicken, fragrant with rosemary. Instead of delight, Susan wrinkled her nose. Chicken again. You know I don't eat the skin. And potatoes. I told you I'm cutting carbs. David stabbed a fork into the meat before anyone else could serve. Well, I'll eat. At least she tried. Claire smirked. Tried is the word. Margaret placed the carrots on the table, their honey glaze glistening, and set down the beans with almonds. Her arms trembled from carrying the dishes, but she ignored the ache. She waited for them to begin, expecting a thank you, maybe a word of kindness. None came. As they filled their plates, Margaret lingered at the edge, hands pressed against her apron. She wanted to sit with them to join in, but no one made room. Susan gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. Mom, could you bring some water? Sparkling if you have it. Not from the tap. Yes, dear. Margaret turned away, her chest tight. She filled glasses carefully, steadying her hands so they would not spill. She had imagined laughter, the way it used to echo through these walls. Instead, she heard forks clink and low voices dripping with disapproval. When she returned, David had already pushed his plate halfway across the table. The chicken's a little dry, Mom. You left it in too long. Margaret placed the glasses down, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. Susan rolled her eyes. Next time maybe just order in. Saves you the trouble. The words settled like stones in Margaret's chest. She forced another smile and nodded, though inside, something small and fragile began to crack. The food was there, the table was set, the house smelled of love, but the people she cooked for seemed blind to it. And somewhere deep inside, Margaret knew this night was only beginning to show its teeth. The table should have been the heart of the evening. Margaret had polished the silver, laid out the good china, and set the daisies in the center as if a little color could soften old wounds. She had dreamed of laughter filling the air, of stories trading hands like gifts. Instead, silence stretched like glass, fragile, sharp, broken only by forks striking plates and the occasional sigh. David carved into the chicken as if he were testing it, not eating it. He chewed once, twice, then shook his head. Dry, Mom. Really dry. You know, Claire's mother makes chicken so juicy you hardly need a knife. You should ask her for tips. Claire dabbed at her mouth with a napkin, her eyes flicking toward Margaret. Or maybe just let us handle the meals when we visit. It's not fair to put yourself through all this. The words sounded kind, but the smirk curling at the edges of her lips made the sting obvious. Margaret bowed her head slightly. I just wanted to make something you would all enjoy. It makes me happy to cook. Susan poked at her potatoes with the tip of her fork. Carbs, Mom. You know I don't eat this stuff anymore. I told you. She slid the bowl toward her mother. Why don't you have them? You're the one who likes heavy food. Margaret's hands tightened in her lap. She wanted to remind Susan of the nights she peeled potatoes until her wrists ached so her children could have full bellies, the nights she went without so they would never know hunger. But she only whispered, I'll eat later. Her son-in-law finally glanced up from his phone. His voice flat. Do you have any wine? Red preferably. This chicken needs it. Hi. Margaret faltered. I have apple cider. He groaned and looked back at his screen. Forget it. The food she had seasoned with care, the pie she had cooled by the window, the cornbread she had buttered. All of it felt invisible, like wallpaper in the background of their discontent. When she tried to sit, Susan gestured with her fork. Could you bring some more napkins? These ones feel rough. Margaret nodded, rising again. Her chair remained empty, untouched. Back in the kitchen, she steadied her breath, her hands gripping the counter. She reminded herself that they were busy people, that they didn't mean harm. They're tired. They've forgotten their manners, that's all. She smoothed her dress, lifted the napkins, and returned. But the laughter that greeted her wasn't warm. Claire leaned close to Susan, whispering, though loud enough for Margaret to hear. It's like stepping back into the 80s in this house. Even the food tastes old. Susan snickered, tossing her hair. Mom doesn't know how to move forward. She still thinks cornbread is impressive. Margaret set the napkins down, her smile trembling. I wanted you to feel at home. David leaned back, patting his stomach. Well, we're full. You can eat what's left later, Mom. He pushed his plate aside, bones and scraps clattering. Susan joined him, pushing half-eaten beans and carrots away. Yes, Mom. You can finish up after us. You don't mind, do you? Her words dripped like oil, thick and deliberate. Then, with a curl of her lip, she added, or maybe you'd prefer the ones that fell. Floor food is more your level, isn't it? The table burst into laughter. Quick, careless, cruel. Margaret stood very still. The sound of their laughter pressed against her chest, sharper than any blade. She lowered her eyes, staring at the neat daisies in the vase. Their white petals blurred through the sting in her eyes. Her heart whispered memories. The nights she fed them first and scraped her plate clean with bread crusts. The mornings she walked to work in shoes with holes so they could have new ones for school. The birthdays where she lit candles on cakes she baked by stretching her last coins. And now, here she was told to eat their scraps. Told she belonged on the floor. The food cooled on the table. The pie's sweet scent drifted from the window. But nothing could hide the bitter taste that had filled the room. Margaret did not cry, not yet. But inside, a storm began to gather. Margaret stood rooted by the daisies, her hands pressed to her apron to keep them from trembling. The laughter of her children, sharp and careless, echoed around the dining room. She forced her lips into something that looked like a smile, though her heart cracked quietly inside her chest. David reached for his glass of water, drank noisily, and set it down with a thunk. Mom, you really should stop tiring yourself out. At your age, this is... well, it's kind of sad. You slaving in the kitchen all day just to serve us half-burnt chicken. Susan added quickly. Honestly, you should be grateful we even came. Do you know how busy we are? We cancelled other plans to be here. Her husband chuckled under his breath, muttering, not sure it was worth it. The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. Margaret swallowed hard. I only wanted us to be together. A family dinner like before. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. Susan smirked, leaning back in her chair. Before what, Mom? Before Dad died. Before we grew up. Those days are gone. You need to accept it. David scraped his fork across the plate, gathering scraps of potato and chicken skin, then nudged it toward her. Here. You can eat this. It's enough for you. Claire followed his lead, sliding her plate across too, with only bones and limp beans left. Yes, take mine as well. You always said you didn't need much. Margaret stared at the plates. Crap. Bones. Cold food laced with fingerprints and disdain. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words past it. I'll eat later, she whispered. Susan wasn't done. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, voice cutting like a knife. Later. You mean after we've all gone and the house is quiet again? You know what, Mom, you should just take the food straight from the floor. Isn't that where old dogs eat? Her words pierced the room. The sound of them seemed to still the air itself. Even the clock on the wall ticked more slowly. Margaret's chest burned. For one moment, she saw herself clearly. Not as her children saw her, not as a tired old woman meant to be dismissed, but as the mother who had raised them, who had bent her back and worn her hands to the bone so they could stand where they stood now. She remembered nights of sewing clothes by candlelight, mornings of walking to work with shoes worn thin, afternoons of skipping her own meals so theirs would be full. And here they were, laughing, telling her she belonged on the floor. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Tears pressed against her lashes, hot and unrelenting, but she did not let them fall in front of them. Instead, she picked up the plates quietly, her hands steady though her heart was not. She turned toward the kitchen. Behind her, Susan laughed again, a sound brittle as glass. See, she'll do it. She always does. That's why we don't respect you, Mom. You never stand up for yourself. The words struck harder than any slap. Margaret paused in the doorway, her back to them. For a fleeting second, she wanted to shout, to slam the plates down, to demand they remember who she was and what she had done for them. But the weight of years pressed on her shoulders, and the storm of grief kept her voice locked. She stepped into the kitchen, placing the plates by the sink. She gripped the counter with both hands until her knuckles whitened. Only then did she allow a single tear to fall, sliding silently onto the cool porcelain. The laughter from the dining room carried on, muffled but cruel, as if her pain were background music to their meal. And in that small, dim kitchen, Margaret's silence became something else. Not surrender, but the beginning of a wound that would demand justice. The night was far from over. The kitchen light hummed faintly above Margaret's head as she stood with her hands braced on the counter. The laughter from the dining room seeped through the walls, careless, mocking, and loud enough for her to feel each word like a pebble thrown against glass. She let the faucet run a trickle of water, pretending to rinse dishes, but really, it was to drown the sound of her children's cruelty. But what her son and daughter didn't realize was that eyes, smaller, sharper, more innocent, were watching. At the far end of the table, Ethan, David's 12-year-old son, sat stiffly in his chair, his fork untouched. He had always loved his grandmother's cooking. Her roasted carrots were his favorite, but tonight he couldn't bring himself to lift a bite. His stomach twisted as he watched his father push a plate of scraps toward the woman who had bandaged his knees and tucked him in on every overnight visit. Beside him, his younger cousin Lily, Susan's daughter, clutched her napkin tight in her little fists. She leaned close and whispered, just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "Why are they being so mean to Grandma?" Ethan swallowed, his voice low and careful. "I don't know. But it's wrong." His eyes, too old for 12, darted toward the kitchen where Margaret had disappeared. He remembered her hands guiding his when he first learned to write his name, her gentle laughter when he spilled milk all over the table, her stories about the grandfather he never knew. To him she was safety. To see her treated like this felt like watching someone slap kindness itself. Neither child touched their food. The plates in front of them cooled, forgotten. Their parents didn't notice. Outside, across the narrow street, Mrs. Porter, Margaret's neighbor of nearly 20 years, stood at her sink rinsing teacups. She glanced out her kitchen window at the familiar silhouette in Margaret's dining room. She had seen the children arrive, polished, hurried, their voices carrying sharp through the evening air. Now, through the glass, she saw Margaret's hunched shoulders retreat into the kitchen while her grown children lounged back, laughing as if the world belonged to them. Mrs. Porter frowned, drying her hands on a towel. She had always admired Margaret's patience, her soft smile, the way she never complained even when the world had taken more from her than it gave. But tonight something looked different, something cruel in the tilt of Susan's head, something hard in David's smirk. Back inside, Margaret steadied her breathing, the sting in her chest easing only slightly. She wiped her tears quickly, not wanting anyone to see. When she turned, she caught a glimpse of Ethan standing quietly in the doorway, his small frame half hidden by the wall. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't listen to them." Margaret froze. His words, so soft, pierced deeper than all the cruelty at the table. She knelt slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, and forced a smile. "Go back and eat, darling. Don't worry about me." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes were glassy, fierce in their own quiet way. "They shouldn't talk to you like that. You don't deserve it." Margaret reached out, brushing a curl of hair from his forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind. But go on, your father will notice." He nodded reluctantly, returning to his seat, though his small fists stayed clenched. Back at the table, Susan was recounting some story about her new promotion, her voice loud and self-satisfied. No one asked Margaret to sit. No one wondered why she was still in the kitchen. But the children knew. The neighbor knew. And now, the house itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the moment when this cruelty, so casual and sharp, would no longer go unanswered. The silence of those who loved her most would not last forever. The night air outside had deepened, the sky a velvet blue pressed against the little windows of Margaret's home. Inside, the smell of pie and roasted chicken lingered heavy, mingling with laughter that wasn't laughter at all, but a chorus of ridicule. Margaret stayed in the kitchen, her hands folded around a damp dish towel, waiting for the moment to pass. Then 3 firm knocks rattled the front door. The laughter died abruptly. Susan glanced at David, brows raised. Who could that be this late? David shrugged. Probably one of Mom's neighbors complaining about the parking. Margaret straightened, wiping her eyes quickly before hurrying down the hall. She opened the door to find a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tweed coat, his gray hair catching the porch light. His smile was kind, but his eyes searched her face with concern. "Margaret," he said warmly, "I was passing through the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. I had something for you." He lifted a brown paper bag. The faint smell of fresh bread drifted out. Her throat tightened. "Mr. Lawson," she whispered, relief and surprise mixing in her chest. "It's been so long." Behind her, Susan's voice cut through. "Who is it, Mom?" Margaret stepped aside, letting him in. "This is Charles Lawson, your father's oldest friend." The dining room shifted uncomfortably as he entered, his presence filling the space with something heavier than the scent of food: respect. Mr. Lawson set the bag on the sideboard, then turned to the table. His gaze swept across Susan, David, their spouses, and finally rested on Margaret. "Smells wonderful in here," he said kindly. "I can see you've been working hard again." Margaret gave a small nod, but her children's silence was sharp. David muttered under his breath, "We didn't invite him." Mr. Lawson's sharp ears caught it. He pulled out a chair without asking, settling himself at the end of the table like he belonged there. "I knew your father well," he began, his voice steady. "And I remember the way Margaret used to run herself ragged making sure you children had everything you needed." Claire shifted in her seat, uneasy. Susan forced a polite smile. "It's late, Mr. Lawson. We were just finishing dinner." "Then I came just in time," he replied smoothly. He reached for the bowl of carrots, serving himself with unhurried grace. "Your mother always made the best meals, even when times were hard. I remember once, your father's paycheck was delayed, and she sold her wedding bracelet just to buy you children new coats for winter. Do you remember that, Margaret?" Her cheeks warmed. She shook her head. "It wasn't important. They needed them." But Ethan, wide-eyed, leaned forward. "You sold your bracelet, Grandma?" The table stilled. Mr. Lawson nodded. "Yes, son. That's the kind of sacrifice she made for all of you. And I don't imagine she's told even half the stories." Susan's smirk faltered. David cleared his throat, picking at the tablecloth. Mr. Lawson's voice sharpened just a touch. "So I was a little surprised when I heard laughter just now. The kind of laughter that didn't sound like gratitude." A flush rose in Susan's cheeks. Claire busied herself with her phone. Margaret lowered her eyes, twisting the towel in her lap. "Please, Charles, it's nothing. They're tired, that's all." But Mr. Lawson wasn't finished. His hand rested gently on hers. "No, Margaret. It's not nothing. I've lived long enough to know the difference between tired words and cruel ones. And tonight, I see a woman who deserves better than scraps." The words hung heavy. For the first time all evening, David had no ready retort. From the hallway window, Mrs. Porter, the neighbor, watched discreetly as the scene unfolded. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the way Mr. Lawson leaned forward, protective, and the way Margaret's children shifted in their chairs like guilty schoolchildren. Inside, Ethan's small hand slipped under the table and found his grandmother's, squeezing it gently. Lily, too, leaned against her arm, whispering, "We love you, Grandma." The balance of the evening had shifted. What began as laughter at Margaret's expense was slowly turning into something else, a reckoning. And for the first time that night, Margaret felt a flicker of strength return to her bones. The dining room air thickened as if someone had drawn the curtains against the night. Mr. Lawson set down his fork, folded his hands, and looked squarely at David and Susan. His voice, calm but edged with steel, filled the room. "I've seen many things in my years," he began. "But what I witnessed here tonight," He glanced at Margaret, her eyes cast down. Is something no mother should endure. David shifted uncomfortably, drumming his fingers against the table. With respect, Mr. Lawson, this is a family matter. You don't know the whole story. But Lawson's gaze didn't waver. Oh, I know enough. I know your mother worked double shifts after your father passed, just so you could finish school without debt. I know she went without new shoes for 5 winters so you could walk into classrooms with your head high. I know she kept this house when the bank wanted to take it, because she said one day her children would come home here and feel safe. His words landed like hammers. Susan's eyes darted to the pie on the sideboard, then back to Lawson. We never asked her to do all that. She chose it. Ethan, voice small but fierce, interrupted. She did it because she loves you. His little fist clenched on the table. And you laughed at her. The room stilled. Lily, her voice trembling, added, You told her to eat from the floor. Susan's face flushed crimson. Children shouldn't interrupt adults, she snapped. Mr. Lawson leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Children see the truth adults try to hide. They saw kindness mocked and dignity trampled. Do you realize what lessons you're teaching them? David pushed back his chair, his voice rising. Enough. We came here out of courtesy, and now we're being lectured like schoolboys. From outside, a shadow moved past the window. Mrs. Porter, who had been drawn by the noise, stood quietly on the porch, listening through the thin wooden door. The glow of her porch light lit her figure, and behind her, a few curious neighbors began to gather, whispering, pointing at the commotion. Inside, Lawson's voice deepened. Courtesy. Is that what you call shoving bones and scraps toward your mother? Is that what you call locking her out of conversation, treating her like a servant in her own home? Claire shifted in her seat, pale now. Charles, maybe we should lower our voices. People might hear. Good, Lawson thundered. Let them hear. Let the world see what becomes of children who forget the hands that raised them. The front door creaked. Mrs. Porter stepped inside without waiting for invitation. Her arms folded. We've heard enough already, she said firmly. Margaret, love, do you need me to stay? Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. David scowled. This is none of your business. But Mrs. Porter wasn't alone. Behind her, 2 more neighbors lingered in the doorway, their eyes full of disapproval. The room had grown larger, heavier, no longer a private dinner but a stage, and Susan and David were exposed under the harsh light of community judgment. Margaret trembled in her chair, her heart pounding. Never in all her years had anyone stood for her like this, not since her husband passed. Lawson's hand rested gently on hers. Margaret, you don't need to say a word. The truth is speaking for you. And as the neighbors murmured, as her grandchildren clung tighter to her arms, Margaret realized something had shifted. For once, the cruelty was not her burden to bear in silence. For once, the shame belonged to those who had inflicted it. The dining room had become a courtroom. Margaret sat at the center, her children on one side, her grandchildren and neighbors on the other. The air pulsed with tension, broken only by the tick of the wall clock and the muffled whisper of the crowd outside the open door. David adjusted his tie, trying to regain composure. We didn't mean anything by it. Mom knows we support her. We send money every month. Margaret's head lifted slightly, her brows knitting. She opened her mouth, but Mr. Lawson spoke first. Money. He leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp. Do you mean the occasional envelope you hand her like charity? Do you know your mother still survives on her late husband's modest pension, stretching every dollar so she doesn't burden you? Do you know she refuses help because she is proud and decent? Claire's face went pale. She shifted in her seat. We thought she was fine. She never asked for more. Because dignity, Lawson said firmly, is not something you beg for. It's something children honor in their parents. Susan snapped, her voice brittle. You're twisting this. We do care. But she has to learn the world has changed. We can't coddle her. Ethan suddenly stood, his small voice trembling but resolute. Grandma never asked to be coddled. She cooked for us, she made everything nice, and you laughed at her. She doesn't need money, she needs love." The room fell silent. Margaret's hand, still resting on the table, curled slowly into a fist. She felt her grandson's truth ripple through her bones. For years she had swallowed words, choosing silence over conflict. But now, surrounded by neighbors with her grandchildren watching, she knew silence would only feed the cruelty. Her voice came at last, soft but clear. "I carried you both in my body. I worked until my hands bled so you would never feel hunger. I went without, over and over, so you could have what you needed." She paused, her eyes brimming but steady. "And tonight you tell me I belong on the floor." Susan shifted uncomfortably, her face red. David opened his mouth, but Margaret raised a trembling hand to stop him. "No more excuses," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Respect is not about money. It is about remembering who kept you alive when you were helpless. Who stayed up with fevers, who prayed through nights of worry. I am your mother. And if that means nothing to you now, then I will no longer beg for the scraps of your love." Her words struck like thunder. Lawson's eyes glistened with pride. "Well said, Margaret. That's the truth they needed to hear." The neighbors murmured in agreement, some nodding firmly, others whispering about shame and disgrace. Even Claire lowered her gaze, her face tight with guilt. David tried one last defense, his tone half pleading. "Mom, we didn't mean it like that. We just expected you to understand." Margaret's shoulders straightened. For the first time in years she did not bend. "I understand perfectly. You have forgotten what family means." Her words hung heavy in the room, undeniable. The tide had shifted. What began as mockery was now unraveling into shame, and the children who had tried to strip their mother's dignity were left exposed, their excuses crumbling like ash. And in the quiet power of her voice, Margaret felt something return to her, something she thought she had lost forever, her strength. The silence after Margaret's words was deeper than any she had known in her own home. For years, her walls had carried echoes of her children's demands, their clipped voices, their sighs of annoyance. But now those same walls held something different. Judgment turned against them. David shifted in his chair, his jaw tight, his pride stung raw. Susan looked at her mother as if seeing a stranger, not the quiet woman who always bowed her head, but someone taller, steadier, and unafraid. Then a small voice cut through the hush. "I'm staying with Grandma," Ethan said firmly, pushing back his chair with a scrape. He walked to Margaret's side and slipped his hand into hers. His young eyes, clear as glass, looked up at her. "She's the only one who treats me with kindness. She tells me stories, she listens. She never makes me feel small." Lily followed, tears brimming. "Me too. I want to stay here." She wrapped her arms around Margaret's waist, pressing her cheek against the worn fabric of her grandmother's dress. Gasps rippled through the neighbors gathered in the doorway. Some covered their mouths, others whispered words of approval. It was the purest justice, the innocence of children turning against the arrogance of their parents. Susan shot to her feet, her voice shrill. "Lily, come here right now." But the little girl only clung tighter, shaking her head. David stood as well, anger flashing. "Ethan, stop this nonsense. We're leaving." Mr. Lawson rose slowly, his presence filling the room. "Leaving is wise," he said evenly. "Leave this house, this table, and reflect on the shame you've brought upon yourselves. Tonight the truth was seen by more than just your mother. The whole neighborhood knows now." Susan's face burned red. "You all have no right." Mrs. Porter stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "We have every right. We've watched Margaret carry you two for decades. And now we see what you've become. Oh, take your pride with you. But don't expect respect from anyone here." The weight of the room pressed down on David and Susan until they could do nothing but gather their coats and leave in a storm of slammed doors and muttered curses. Their cars roared down the street, their anger trailing behind like exhaust. When the sound faded, the house exhaled. Margaret sat down heavily, Ethan and Lily still at her side. Mr. Lawson touched her shoulder gently. You see, you're not alone. The people who matter, the ones who still know love, are here. Margaret closed her eyes, tears spilling at last. But they were not tears of humiliation. They were the tears of a woman who had endured cruelty and finally seen justice done. The neighbors offered quiet words of comfort before slipping out, leaving behind the warmth of their approval. The room, once so heavy with scorn, now glowed with something new, dignity reclaimed. Margaret looked at the two children, her hands cupping their faces. You don't know how much this means to me. Tonight you gave me back my heart. Ethan whispered. No, Grandma. You gave us yours first. And with that, laughter, real gentle laughter, returned to the house for the first time in years. The scales had balanced. Cruelty had been answered with truth, arrogance with shame, and love with loyalty. This was justice, not in a court of law but in the eyes of a community, in the hands of children who chose what was right. Margaret no longer felt like a servant in her own home. She felt like what she had always been, the center of a family cherished and worthy. And for once it was visible to all. When the door clicked shut behind Susan and David, a long hush settled over the house. For the first time all evening, the air no longer buzzed with cruelty. Instead, it carried the faint sweetness of apple pie cooling on the windowsill and the softer sound of children's laughter. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her hands resting gently on Ethan's shoulder and Lily's hair. Her chest still ached from the words her own children had thrown like stones, but for the first time in years, her heart also felt lighter. She was not alone, not truly. Mr. Lawson remained at the table. His expression softened. He reached for a slice of pie, cut it neatly, and set it before Margaret. Eat, he said simply, his voice steady but kind. Not from scraps. Not from the floor. From your own table, with your family beside you. Margaret blinked back tears as Ethan eagerly fetched forks and Lily fetched napkins. They sat close, their small frames pressed against her, their eyes bright with pride. Together they tasted the pie, warm, spiced with cinnamon, the crust flaky under their forks. It was the same pie she had baked for her children when they were little. But tonight it tasted different. Tonight it tasted of dignity restored. Mrs. Porter slipped back in briefly, placing a hand on Margaret's shoulder. You raised them, love, but you're not defined by their choices. Look around you, you've got love here. That's more than enough. Margaret nodded, her lips trembling. I gave everything I had to them. I thought it was wasted. Ethan looked up at her firmly. It wasn't wasted. Not on us. And Lily whispered, we'll never treat you the way they did. Never. The words washed over Margaret like a bomb, filling cracks left by years of silent endurance. She realized then that blood alone did not make a family. Respect, kindness, and loyalty did. Later, as the children curled on the sofa with blankets, Margaret sat in the glow of the lamplight, her cup of tea warm in her hands. The night outside was quiet again, the streetlights casting soft halos on the road. Inside, the house felt different, no longer a stage for her humiliation, but a sanctuary once more. Mr. Lawson rose to leave, pausing by the door. Hold your head high, Margaret. The people who tried to put you on the floor walked out tonight. The ones who lift you up stayed. She smiled, weary but radiant. Thank you, Charles, for seeing me when my own children would not. When he was gone, Margaret sat back down with her grandchildren, their laughter spilling softly into the night. She stroked their hair, kissed their foreheads, and felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. Family is not just about blood. Family is about respect, love, and the hands that fed you when you were too small to feed yourself. Margaret's children mocked her sacrifice, but in the end, their cruelty only revealed their own shame. And through it all, the truth shone brighter than their laughter. Dignity cannot be taken by those who have forgotten love. Remember this. Never forget the hands that carried you. Never mock the ones who sacrificed for you. Because one day, it may be their silence, not their presence that you long for. Thanks for watching.